Have you ever wondered if there's a natural way to lower your high blood pressure, guard against Alzheimer's, lose weight, feel better? Well, it turns out there is. Welcome to the Nutrition Facts podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Greger. Are your pots and pans and aluminum foil toxic? Today we start out by looking at the DNA damage that may be caused by certain uses of aluminum cookware.
Over the last decades, the toxicity of aluminum for humans has been heavily discussed and still not completely clarified. Those occupationally exposed to aluminum, like smelter plants, suffer from oxidative stress, free radicals that can damage their DNA. But what about just using aluminum cookware? Articles suggesting an unrecognized public health risk was limited to the developing world, where cookware is made in informal shops by casting liquid aluminum melted from a collection of scrap metal, including the likes of lead batteries, which is how you can get so much lead leaching into people's food. But then this study was published suggesting the aluminum itself may be harmful. Most of our aluminum exposure comes from processed junk that contains aluminum-containing food additives, including those within some processed cheeses, baking powders, cake mixes, frozen dough, and pancake mixes. But approximately 20% of the daily intake of aluminum may come from aluminum cooking utensils, such as pans, pots, kettles, and trays. To see if this may be causing a problem, they took blood from consumers that used aluminum cookware versus those that did not, and found that not only were the aluminum users walking around with twice the level of aluminum in their blood, but they had more free radical damage of their body fats and proteins, and the total antioxidant capacity of their bloodstream was compromised. So, no surprise, suffered significantly more DNA damage. And indeed, those with the highest levels of aluminum in their blood tended to suffer significantly more damage to their DNA. No surprise, since aluminum is considered to be a pro-oxidant agent. These folks weren't just casually using aluminum pots, though, but specifically using them daily to cook and store acidic foods like yogurt and tomato sauce, which can leach out more aluminum. But even just a week using like camping dishes, which tend to be aluminum since they're so light, if you were incorporating something acidic like marinating a fresh couch in lemon juice, could greatly exceed the tolerable weekly intake guidelines, especially for children. Once in a while is not going to make much of a difference, but this suggests that you may not want to be cooking in aluminum day in and day out. What about aluminum drinking bottles? They're nice and light, but children drinking 2 cups of tea or juice a day from them could exceed the tolerable aluminum exposure limit. So, out of an abundance of caution, safety authorities like the German Federal Institute for Risk Assessment recommend that consumers avoid the use of aluminum pots or dishes for acidic or salted foodstuffs, such as applesauce, rhubarb, tomato puree, or salt herring, to avoid any unnecessary ingestion of aluminum. What about aluminum foil? It's a common culinary practice to wrap food in aluminum foil and bake it. The concern is that this could potentially present a hazardous source of aluminum in the human diet. When put to the test, yes, there was leakage from the foil to the food, but the amount was so small that it would be more of an issue for small children or those suffering from diminished kidney function. What about just wrapping a food in foil to store in the fridge? Only marginal increases in aluminum are seen unless the food is in contact with both the foil and, at the same time, certain other types of metal. For example, stainless steel, which is largely iron, and so that sets up a battery, and so can lead to tremendous food aluminum concentrations. And finally, you know how there's sometimes a glossy side of aluminum foil and then kind of a dull side? Which would be worse? Fish fillets were baked and grilled both ways, wrapped in the glossy side versus wrapped in the dull side, and no significant difference was found.
In our next story, we look at the best type of pots and pans to use.
Stainless steel isn't excellent option. The metal chosen in applications where safety and hygiene are considered utmost importance, such as kitchenware. But what about studies showing stainless steel can leach nickel and chromium into foods during cooking? That's what keeps the iron in stainless steel unstained by rust. The leaching is really only when they're brand new. Metal leaching decreases with sequential cooking cycles and stabilizes after the 6th time you cook with it. Under more common day-to-day conditions, the use of stainless steel pots is considered to be safe even for most people who are acutely sensitive to those metals. A little leaching metal can be a good thing in the case of straight iron, like a cast iron skillet, which can have the beneficial effect of helping to improve iron status, helping to potentially reduce the incidence of iron deficiency anemia among reproductive-age women and children. The only caveat is that you don't want to be frying in cast iron. Frying isn't healthy regardless, but at hot temperatures, vegetable oil can react with the iron to create trans fats. What about using non-stick pans? Teflon, also known as polytetrafluoroethylene, is used as an inner coating material in nonstick cookware. Teflon's dark history was the subject of a recent movie called Dark Water, starring Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway. Employees in DuPont's Teflon division started giving birth to deformed babies before DuPont removed all female staff from the unit. Of course, they buried it all, hiding it from regulators and the public. Despite this significant history of industry knowledge about how toxic some of the chemicals used to make Teflon were, they were able to keep it all hidden. But eventually, were forced to settle for over $500 million after one of the chemicals was linked to kidney and testicular cancers, pregnancy-induced hypertension, ulcerative colitis, and high cholesterol. At normal cooking temperatures, Teflon-coated cookware releases various gases and chemicals that present mild to severe toxicity. You've heard of, canaries in a coal mine? Well, they're more like canaries in a kitchen, as cooking with Teflon cookware is well known to kill pet birds in the house, or Teflon-coated heat lamp bulbs wiping out half a chicken flock. Apart from the gases released during heating the cooking pans, the coating itself starts damaging after a certain period. It's normally advised to use slow heating when cooking in Teflon-coated pans, but you can imagine how consumers might ignore that. And some of the Teflon can start chipping off if you're not careful and make its way into the food, though the effects of ingestion are unknown. The only study I could find looking at the potential human health effects of cooking with non-stick pots and pans, and the use of non-stick cookware was associated with about a 50% increased risk of colorectal cancer. But that may be because of what they were cooking. Non-stick cookware is used in hazardous high-heat cooking methods like broiling, frying, grilling, or barbecuing, mainly for meat, poultry, or fish, in which carcinogenic heterocyclic amines are formed from the animal protein. And then the animal fat can produce another class of carcinogens called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, though it's possible it was the Teflon itself which contains suspected carcinogens like that C8 compound from the movie, also known as PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid. Due to toxicity concerns, this chemical has been replaced with other chemicals, such as Gen X, but these new alternatives are also suspected to have similar toxicity. But we've already so contaminated the earth with it that we now can get it pre-packaged in food before it's even cooked, particularly in fish, dairy products, and meat, which is now the main source of human exposure to these toxic pollutants. Of those, seafood is the worst. In a study of diets from around the world, fish and seafood were major contributors of the perfluoroalkyl substances, as expected, given that everything eventually flows into the sea. Though the aquatic food chain is the primary transfer mechanism for these toxins into the human diet, food stored or prepared in grease-proof packaging materials like microwave popcorn may also be a source. And in 2019, Oral-B Glide dental floss was tested. 6 out of 18 dental floss products they tested showed evidence of Teflon-type compounds. So did those who use those kinds of floss end up with Higher levels in their bloodstream? Yes, apparently so. Higher levels of perfluorohexane sulfonic acid were found in Oral-B glide flosses. There's lots of environmental exposures in the modern world we can't avoid, but we shouldn't be making things worse by adding it to consumer products. But hey, at least it gives us some power to lower our personal exposure to these harmful chemicals.
Finally today, we look at the role that aluminum may or may not play in causing Alzheimer's disease.
The so-called aluminum hypothesis for the cause of Alzheimer's disease dates back to 1965, when the inadvertent injection of aluminum into the brains of rabbits caused neurological symptoms along with what initially looked like Alzheimer's disease tangles in the brain. Then, in the 1970s, it was first reported that the aluminum content of Alzheimer's brains was higher than that of control brains on autopsy. Following that, there was a rash of fatal dementia cases attributed to dialysis fluids contaminated with aluminum. This trio of findings led researchers to suggest that aluminum, the third most abundant element on Earth after oxygen and silicon, may play a role in the development of Alzheimer's disease. The first crack in the theory was the realization that, upon closer inspection, the tangle-like changes in rabbit brains were not much like those found in human Alzheimer's disease after all. The changes in aluminum-induced dialysis encephalopathy were also dissimilar. Aluminum could certainly be toxic to the brain, but not necessarily in a way that had anything to do with Alzheimer's disease. And subsequent autopsy studies of Alzheimer's victims did not consistently find higher aluminum levels, and even if they did, elevations in the brain aluminum could be a consequence rather than a cause, reflecting Alzheimer's disease damage to the blood-brain barrier. The aluminum hypothesis came under heavy fire in the scientific community. Only later did we learn that the most vocal critics were secretly paid aluminum industry hacks. In hindsight, that was probably unnecessary, as the tide of evidence eventually turned against the role of aluminum. What convinced me was a meta-analysis that failed to find a connection between regular antacid use and Alzheimer's. Processed food contained a variety of aluminum-containing additives, such as anti-caking agents in pancake mix, melting agents in American cheese, meat binders, gravy thickeners, rising agents, and some baking powders, and dye binders in candy. However, over-the-counter antacids are probably the most important source for human aluminum exposure in terms of dose. In terms of the safety of dietary aluminum, the tolerable weekly intake is 1 milligram per healthy kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh about 150 pounds, you shouldn't get more than like 10 milligrams a day. 1 day of Maalox can give you 3,800 milligrams, nearly 400 times the daily safety limit. And nowhere on the label does it say not to take with acidic beverages such as fruit juice. Washing an acid down with orange juice can increase aluminum absorption 8-fold. The total aluminum intake in drinking water and processed foods in most countries may only be a few milligrams a day, but some antacids can increase daily aluminum consumption by up to several grams, 1,000-fold higher. And so if antacid use isn't related to Alzheimer's risk, then ingested aluminum is unlikely to be a cause. Now, just because aluminum doesn't cause Alzheimer's doesn't mean aluminum intake is necessarily benign. Those who cook with aluminum and store acidic foods like yogurt and tomato in aluminum cookware suffer significantly more DNA damage, leading some regulators to recommend consumers avoid the use of aluminum pots or dishes for acidic or salted foodstuffs. In my video on antiperspirants and breast cancer, I note how the FDA and European safety authorities specifically advise against using aluminum antiperspirants on damaged skin, which may even include avoiding them after shaving. As a metalloestrogen, aluminum absorption may explain why breast cancer may occur as much as 20 years earlier in women using antiperspirant and shaving their armpits more than 3 times a week. You can also avoid high dietary sources by choosing non-aluminum baking powder for baking and avoiding processed cheese. Aluminum salts can give cheese desirable slicing properties, but that means a single grilled cheese sandwich can end up exceeding the World Health Organization's provisional tolerable daily intake of aluminum by as much as 400%.
We would love it if you could share with us your stories about reinventing your health through evidence-based nutrition. Go to NutritionFacts.org/testimonials. We may be able to share it on social media to help inspire others. If you want to see any of the graphs, charts, graphics, images, or studies mentioned here, please go to the Nutrition Facts podcast landing page. There you'll find all the detailed information you need, plus links to all the sources we cite for each of these topics. My latest book, How Not to Age, is out now. Check it out from your local public library. And of course, all the proceeds from the sale of all of my books goes directly to charity. NutritionFacts.org is a nonprofit science-based public service where you can sign up for free daily updates on the latest in nutrition research with bite-sized videos and articles. Everything on the website is free. There are no ads, no corporate sponsorships, no kickbacks, strictly non-commercial. I'm not selling anything. I just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love, as a tribute to my grandmother, whose own life was saved with evidence-based nutrition.